Test, test. All right, welcome everyone. This will be a panel on trying to how to design decentralized identity systems with a focus on institutional adoption. And I guess trying to do a bit of requirements gathering for these kind of high assurance use cases and how the current identity stacks how the architect looks like to address these problems. So we have Anau from Aztec, who's the executive director of Aztec Foundation, or original Aztec co-founder. He is distributing the Aztec Privacy First L2s and the Noir CK language, focusing on programming privacy and compliance-friendly features like view and auto keys, plus ecosystem growth via the new non-profit foundation. And then we have Lasha from Rarimo, the co-founder of Rari Labs and Rarimo. He leads Rarimo's permissionless CK identity registry and client-side approving CK passport, pushing multi-chain issue agnostic credentials without specialized hardware. And then we have Marek. We have Nanak from Holonym, who's the co-founder of Holonym Foundation, HumanID, who's focusing on private programmable KYC and Sybil resistance with client-side CK proofs and simple APIs and SPTs for on-chain checks like residency, age, and uniqueness. And then we have DC Builder from World, who's a research engineer at World Foundation, WorldID. He's working on WorldID's core protocols, state bridge, sign-up sequencer, Semaphore circuits, and developer tooling, and bringing proof of personhood at scale using CK to keep user private while enforcing one human, one account. And then we have a final addition, Yingtong here. Previously worked at CCAS as a research engineer and doing a lot of research engineering when it comes to ZKID, specifically with a target towards EU requirements for identity solutions. So I guess with that, maybe if you guys want to add something, we can go in turn. And each of you is sort of designing a system for identity using CK. And maybe you can describe sort of the core architectural principles that you use that sort of defines your approach and what privacy guarantees it has. So maybe we can start with a DC Builder from World.
Test. Test.
All right. So for us, so you said like 4 principles, design principles, I guess, for how WorldID works. So WorldID is built so that you have essentially Sybil resistance. You one person, one action for any given sort of protocol that you want to build. So we're built on top of Semaphore, which is a Merkle tree, private Merkle tree sort of protocol that allows you to prove that you own a private key to a public key in a Merkle tree without revealing which one it is using ZK. The sort of core principle is essentially like we have this hardware device called the orb, which verifies a person to be real and unique. And then we use multi-party computation for the uniqueness check, where everything is like private at the same time as well. Once the orb verifies the person is real and unique, and it goes to the MPC uniqueness check, we insert them into Merkle tree, we insert the user's public key into the Merkle tree, and then the user can create client-side proofs of essentially being included in this Merkle tree. And we also leverage a nullifier scheme similar to the one that Semaphore uses, slightly different, where we take the hash of the private key, the action ID, and the app ID, and you're able to represent unique actions that way, right? So like if you have a voting protocol, for example, you can have the app ID be like vote app, and you can have an action vote 1, for example, and that would be a unique hash, sort of like a prefix. And then you also have the private key, right? So like that would be unique per user, and then the user would not be able to do that action more than once. We're also working on a client-side proving backend for Noir, so that you can make performant client-side proofs on mobile devices, because we have like 38 million users for World app. 17 million or so, or 16 million or so are verified by the orb. So yeah, we're really excited about essentially allowing people to create all sorts of attestations on local mobile devices.
Thank you.
So yeah, I think WorldCoin is a really great example of a ZKID system, and my work at the Ethereum Foundation has been sort of more generic. So the World Orb is one example of an issuer. There's many other issuers. So institutions like governments issue passports, driver's licenses, and basically ZKID is a generic way to instantiate an anonymity set over the issued credential. So for WorldCoin, your anonymity set is everyone who's registered in WorldCoin. If you start from a passport, your anonymity set is everyone else who holds the passport from that country. And yeah, as DC mentioned, efficient client-side proving is an absolute priority for ZKID to be feasible and have good UX. And I think I would love to see on this panel about institutional adoption, more discussion on standards, more discussion on interfaces that are friendly for legacy entities such as issuers or verifiers who are not used to even Noir or zero-knowledge proof systems.
Hi, everyone. What are the principles, right? So in a way, how we design stuff, I would say like we're looking at like reverse engineering. So looking at like how the data flow happened, how this issuer, all these relationships were aligned, and trying to cut out all the dependency kind of trust anchors within this flow. So our framework is about like maximum putting kind of bet on this client-side proving, and as well erasing everything in between that has something to do with either like a template storage or any type of secret storage or any type of even issuer in between. So trying to design the system that is kind of simple and directly works on any device in any part of the world and goes back to the fundamentals, right? So it can be censorship resistance, both from a technical perspective, like architecturally, and plus, very important in the identity space because of the regulation stuff, to be regulatory resistant as well. Because so far we've seen that like regulatory capture and the certain jurisdictions is a bigger threat to such systems than a technical kind of entry points.
So we don't build identity solutions. We build a general purpose. Aztec is a general purpose platform. So we're an Ethereum-based layer 2. We have some principles that are very dear and close to our heart, including decentralization from day one and stage 2 from launch, which we're getting to this week, thankfully, after many years. But I guess from my perspective, I'm a bottoms-up kind of guy. I'd rather work on, or it feels more important to work on Noir to enable, I guess, an easy development, easy experimentation around these primitives. I guess maybe if I do want to add a little bit of spice, fuck standards. We're not at a standards point yet. Let people experiment, let people break things, and build platforms that are general enough and flexible enough that even if we mess up on the patterns that we choose at this stage, we have a little bit of leeway to still make them interoperable, because that's what computers are good for.
So at human.tech with humanID, we have a couple ways of doing ZK verification. So one is with passports, NFC passports. For this, we keep everything like fast and client side to keep the anonymity set of governments and other issuers that use like legacy signature schemes like RSA. We employ a vol-based ZK proving system. So this is not succinct, but that's fine for our use case because we're not posting on a blockchain. It turns out to be very, very fast though. So that's how we manage client-side proving with our like particular restrictions and threat models of having to be on client-side devices, but not caring about posting on a public blockchain. We offer other ways of verifying ID2 for people without NFC-enabled passports, which sadly is most people still. So for those users, we have to sacrifice some privacy, of course, because there's no other, no other way to verify the identity. So we employ standard KYC services, like on Fido, for example, and then wrap those credentials in a ZK-friendly format for the baby jub curve, and that allows users to prove stuff about it later on. Now, one challenge with models like this is data storage, because you don't want to store any data about the user. But you also want to prevent them from registering twice for civil resistance. You want to make sure there's no database saying this person's registered before, so don't give them a new credential. So for that, we employ what's called an oblivious pseudorandom function, really interesting primitive. So we built an OPRF called Human Network, and that lets you make privacy-preserving like nullifiers for these users.
Thank you. And also want to introduce Marek from Self, who's the co-founder of Self Protocol, co-founder of Cello, and CEO of C-Labs. They're building a CK identity stack that turns readable documents like e-passports into selective disclosure proofs, emphasizing developer-friendly integrations, and a federated attestation model with ODIS and OPRF. So Marek, the question is sort of, if you want to add something to that, as well as sort of the principles you have in terms of your architecture and the privacy guarantees.
Sure. Hey, everyone. Apologies for being a few minutes late. My prior panel ran over. It's wonderful to be here. Yes, so Self is a ZK passport protocol that has some similarities maybe to some of the other protocols here on stage. I think maybe one of the main differences is that we've raced really, really fast to be the first like truly production-ready, fully audited, bulletproof ZK passport protocol that supports passports, that supports EU IDs, as well as biometric IDs in other countries, and then also that supports the Aadhaar national ID card in India. And so we've worked really hard to add as many different biometric IDs as possible to try to get as big coverage as possible. And then, we were talking about the kind of privacy pool. The bigger the number of users you have entering your protocol, the more privacy you can provide. And so we're very, very cognizant about that. And so we've made, I think, intentionally decisions to try to bootstrap that privacy pool as quickly as possible to get as many people in the door as possible. And so that's meant, sacrificing on client-side proving. I think when we first started, we worked really, really hard to get a system that could actually prove client-side, not just for RSA-based schemes, but for all of the ECDSA ones. That proved quite difficult. We wanted to be production-ready, fully audited, not rely on new ZK primitives that weren't yet production-ready. And so that forced us to use CIRCOM and GROS16, and of course with that we weren't able to get to client-side proving and then also be able to do on-chain verification. And so what we do is we use a TE to accelerate the proof, but the TE deletes your data as soon as the proof is generated. And of course the mobile app, which is all open source, and the TE code is all open source, so you can verify this, connects to the TE only after it verifies the attestation, and then to confirm that your data will be deleted after the ZKP is created. And we thought that this would be a good way to bootstrap things. This is not the end state for us. We're very, very bullish on client-side proving, and we're working hard on enabling that. But for now, we wanted to get to something that people can start playing with. And I think this approach has paid dividends. We've been able to get some really great partnerships. Aave uses Self for some boosted rewards pools, which is pretty cool. You can double your reward on certain pools if you verify with Self. Velodrome has done the same thing, which is pretty neat as well. And then finally, probably our biggest partnership is with Google Cloud. They're integrating Self actively into 3 new products. One, a faucet, a testnet faucet product that maybe you've used before. You'll be able to get more coins if you verify with Self. The other one is pretty cool. It's going to be a first of its kind mainnet faucet. So they're actually using the OFAC check that we provide to do that. And then finally, something related to their Web3 AI search product, which I can go into in more detail if people have any questions.
Okay. Thank you, Ron. But maybe starting with now, like when you talk to governments and institutional partners, what are sort of the most common technical or regulatory requirements that come up, and how do you guys think about that?
Well, I think for most of them, they still don't really. An example is in Switzerland, the financial regulator called FINMA, I think has experienced a few body blows over the past 10 years where they made bad decisions around their licensing and their, or I shouldn't say bad decisions, they made decisions that backfired. And I think as a result, they have become very conservative when, at some point they were really willing to engage with crypto. In fact, were wanting to be very friendly. They've now transitioned to being very, very conservative. And as an example, stablecoins, if you want to issue a stablecoin in Switzerland, they ideally want you, their guidance is you need to KYC AML and keep those records, traditional KYC AML, for all holders. So obviously there's no stablecoins that are issued in Switzerland. When you read their guidance, and to some extent when you speak to the people involved, of course they feel constrained to some extent by policies, for example, in Europe or in the US, they feel a little bit on the back foot, but they also, I think, do care about user safety and financial safety. It's just that they reach for, given their current understanding of the world, they reach for intermediation as basically the only way to add safety to these kinds of systems. So when you talk to them about zero-knowledge proofs, most of the time you're not really talking about cryptography. You're talking about, you're trying to find the vocabulary that, given their needs, their felt needs, sometimes you need to push back on those, right? Sometimes they're a little bit too, the perfect world has zero fraud, which I don't think is quite true. But most of the time it's just about finding a way to frame both legally and just again, the words that you use, these technologies in a way that they understand what you're trying to do. So thankfully, there are quite a few people in Switzerland who are trying to push along this direction, but a similar story kind of recurs in other places. The best way, maybe to finish off, the best way to think about regulators is not as a blob. There are like specific people that you should go and talk to that have, depending on, talking to Hester Peirce, she understands privacy and understands the kind of the pitch for privacy very well, and also the downsides to things like BSA, etc. But she's not alone, right? You need to build coalitions ideally. So it's not really about the technology or the design space. It's about finding the right words.
Another thing to be careful of is to differentiate use cases. So for example, KYC for issuing stablecoins is very different from, say, age verification for accessing pornhub.com. And like these have different privacy requirements, and ZKID may be more or less suitable, like depending on the use case. So yeah. It's such a good point that regulators are not like a homogeneous blob. They each have different requirements, and that's also true for use cases. So I think in some cases, ZKID is very appropriate. In other cases, we shouldn't use digital ID at all. And in yet other cases, we need the full, like, personally identifying information anyway. So yeah, that I also experienced that when talking to regulators.
And I would add also, in conversations with governments, it's sometimes helpful to bring in ZK and privacy, not as the end goal, but as like a step or part of the package. So governments don't tend to have like privacy as one of their main goals. I can't speak for everybody in government.
Or even when they do, for example, the US technically has privacy as a core component of the Constitution. But in practice, people have very different understandings of what that means, depending on their activities and also their constraints. So, yeah.
Yeah, that is that is another interesting topic. Yeah, and so like in conversations we've had, sometimes privacy has never been the end goal, but some other advantage of privacy. Like for example, bringing high net worth individuals to a small country where the high net worth individuals care about privacy. That's an interesting use case. Or maybe a lot of countries want a new digital ID system. So you just pitch a new digital ID system and say, by the way, we're also making this privacy friendly. We're going to make like this, ZK optional add-on so that you can support these like forward-facing use cases. So these types of ways of bringing privacy into the conversation have worked well.
Lasha, what are your thoughts on this?
You started, so I could be controversial as well, right? So, okay, basically, I'm gonna say that I don't think we're ready as a kind of framework or identity to go and offer something like fundamentally new to the government that they have to like follow. Why? I had a kind of rough start. Like 10 years ago, I was working on something called Stork 2.0. Has anyone heard about it? It was a huge initiative in European Union to standardize the digital signatures among the countries so you would have a unified identity and the ability to like blah, the same stuff. It evolved into something called EIDAS. And what you see within governments trying to implement these standards or whatever, every other 10 year or 5 year, there's some type of new improvement in the technology that comes in, and before they get educated in terms of like how this is different, how this is better with this kind of incremental improvements, the new systems comes out. So I'm looking at like what is happening right now. We're looking at the flow, or like whether it's authentication or whatever content we take, and we're trying to shoehorse ZK privacy in the same type of data flow and a bit de-risk a bit how we manage the user identity. Whether it's like, oh, you don't have to store a raw image, but store a template. Oh no, you don't have to store a template, store it in 3 different places. Oh no, it could be a hash now. So the same stuff, so same regulations, same flow applies, and we're just trying to like cosmetically offer something new that fundamentally does not like cut out or improve the process or make it like really efficient. It even makes it worse from a UX perspective. So while talking to governments, I'm like super enthusiastic. I love talking to them, like explaining and stuff, but I think we're not there yet. So it's not about even standard. It's about like, do we have something like fundamentally different, like a decentralized money issuance and kind of censorship resistant systems where for the financials that they couldn't resist and could take off in parallel? And I think we should take that radical path. First, carve out something that is not kind of skeuomorphic approach to what exists, but be a bit of a radical, and then they will follow. And that's how I see a tilt happening in something that empowers users and not just like playing and dancing like every 10 years with these different entities.
How do you, because you guys, some of you touched on this, like how do you think about balancing compliance versus user privacy as well, and sort of the core cyberpunk approach versus more like let's work with governments and all these things? So maybe starting with DC Builder?
Yeah, sorry. So for us, World works with pretty much like most data privacy authorities in the world. In Europe, for example, we're registered with the Data Privacy Authority in Munich, in Bavaria, which is the most well-known one in Europe. I feel like one of my favorite experiences was working with the Malaysian government, where like I worked closely with them on like a proof of concept around digital identity and zero-knowledge client-side proving and stuff. I feel like the thing that they want is that they have regulations that preserve the privacy of their citizens so that like personal data of their citizens does not leak abroad and like are custodied in like foreign databases and other things. And they actually have legislation for this. For example, so they have like this Digital Security Act, and in the Digital Security Act they say you cannot collect like data about like the age, nationality, birth, and at the same time they also want you to sort of make sure that the users you interacting with certain websites are over a certain age. So you even have like actually like oxymoronic legislation where like you cannot keep data about the user, but at the same time you have to enforce that the user is not over 16. So this is like a perfect use case for zero knowledge, right? Like the way that I see it is that privacy and like the client-side proving tools that we're building directly enable the things that they want to see in the world. They just couldn't put their finger on what that thing was before. So I feel like it's that, right? Like you can prove to them that like, hey, this user is over 16 without revealing anything else about the user, and you sort of meet the exact needs that a lot of these governments have, where like they want to know that the sort of service providers are not collecting personal information, but at the same time that they're not sort of violating some other law around like sort of giving access to specific services. And it's been a long road for us, like a lot of legal discussions explaining, for example, what multi-party computation is, what ZK is, because we have like the biometrics angle as well, where we have this sort of iris code embeddings. They're like vector embeddings representing the uniqueness of each iris. And so we have a multi-party computation database of these, which is like operated by different universities around the world. And so explaining all these things, I feel like to them, they're like really excited about it, but they're also really skeptical. So it's always going to be a game of constantly explaining, constantly like showing and being transparent as possible. And as you say, like being a little bit radical is like showing the use case. And once you see like, this is a really major use case that will actually make them, because they want to have political wins. The governments want to have political wins. So like if they adopt a new technology and it increases the value accrual to that country in some way, then they're really gonna want to have it. And to tie it back to my example with Malaysia, the use case that they really wanted to enforce is government subsidies for diesel fuel. The Singaporeans used to drive up to Malaysia and like fuel their cars there for a lot cheaper, and therefore like abusing the government subsidy in Malaysia for Malaysian citizens. And so the way you could do it is just prove that you're a Malaysian citizen at a gas stop with like a client-side proof, right? Like on a mobile device. But they weren't able to do that, so they actually had to cancel that government subsidy. But imagine like if you actually build that with client-side proving in mind, and you had a truly robust system with like proper root of trust, proper selective disclosure, you could actually like save hundreds of millions of dollars of government subsidies that were abused before by foreign parties or whatever. But like this applies to general like use cases. So I feel like once you can present the use case, like, hey, you're gonna save $500 million, you're gonna be able to do these subsidies, you're gonna be able to do that and this and that. And once a few countries have successful pilots and successful use cases, it's gonna be a wave that just takes everything else with you. And that's sort of how I see the thing.
Yeah, I think it's really important as well not to consider the task at hand to be talking to government until they tell you explicitly that the specific thing that you want to do is okay and correct, and in fact going to be the way that things work going forward. There are many more opportunities to find places where maybe the government is not quite aware, or maybe it is just a new space, like the crypto on-ramps, for example, right? My understanding is in most jurisdictions, KYC is not actually something that you're obligated to do, but most companies make the rational decision of KYCing as an anti-fraud measure, right? Because otherwise you just pay with your credit card that you've stolen details of, and you fuck off with your self-custodial crypto. So they do KYC, but there are better solutions, right? You can do biometric authentication of the credit card payment by merging something like a private face map with potentially a passport, and also verifying the data that gets returned by the credit card network associated with the credit card doing the on-ramp, where you get very strong authentication. And that will not be something that you get a government to be like, that's fine, that's great, fantastic. But if you go to them, or if they come to you 2 years from now being like, how are you preventing fraud on your on-ramp? And you have documented efforts that you've really put in the work to achieve the goals that they want to achieve, right? Don't fund terrorists, don't fund North Korea, don't allow people's credit cards to be stolen. I think you will find them easier to work with than people assume.
Maybe I want to move on to some other questions, but Marek, I want to give you also a chance to sort of talk about this tension, how you guys think about it itself.
Yeah, so I think, I guess I agree a little bit with Lasha that we're still really early. You know, I think our role right now is to educate these regulators. I don't think it's to come up with viable solutions for them, because I think it'll just take too long for them to actually adopt it. We've been working a little bit with the California government. California just recently, as of last month, started issuing biometric driver's licenses. Pretty cool. And we've been chatting with some folks there. And what's interesting is the way that, I mean, they're very eager to learn, and their eyes certainly open really wide when they finally understand what this technology can enable. There's a little bit of similarities to maybe 5 years ago when we were chatting with regulators about stablecoins and what stablecoins can enable. We're seeing kind of glimmers of kind of the same reactions, and so that's really, really exciting. But you know, there's no question that it's going to take a long, long time before any of these governments start legislating something that could actually start leveraging this technology. So yeah, it'll be a long journey, but it's definitely on us now to start educating.
I really like DC's point about having a value proposition to the government, like we'll save you money or we'll protect you from like the Singaporeans. But
I feel a little attacked there because I was born in Singapore, and my parents have definitely, at least on a number of times, driven to Malaysia to top up on gas.
Which of us has not exploited some government subsidy or another?
But yeah, I think, and in some cases, the governments, they do paint themselves into the corner where they need ZKID. Like, for instance, the EU Commission, by the way, is very seriously considering the Google Wallet's solution, Longfellow. It's in all their AI discussions. And yeah, it's because they themselves put in very strong high-level requirements for unlinkability that their chosen solution was initially unable to
Did you know
satisfy.
that in Belgium they had like this kind of private wallet for identity, and once the government learned what was going on, they rolled out the official state one and made like everything obsolete. So the thing is that another really good point with the governments, once they learn something and they like, oh, I can get everyone in this app and I have can have a control, they take it out, they take over. And that has been like going on right now in EU. If you know, like go to UK stuff. UK had this thing that they were like, we're gonna roll out the government app for GovTech, whatever physical ID and the services in it. Is there a place for Google and Apple? And imagine like where Google, Apple, and government are fighting. Is there a place for us? I don't know.
So on that note, I want to move into, we have like 50 minutes or so left. Can I give you each like a minute, like quite a tall order, but we touched on these standards and like interoperability and so on. And I would be curious to sort of tease out that tension a little bit. Like, what do you all think in terms of what should be standardized and how do we think about things like interoperability? I know you all have different opinions, so just try to keep your answers like a minute each, just sort of focus on the main diff and how you guys think about it and if solutions can coexist and the pros and cons and so on. So maybe starting with Nanak.
I will second Arno's fuck standards.
Yeah.
I think it's really tempting to build standards in the identity space. Really tempting, because you always want to build general purpose solutions, and then what happens is it ends up not actually fitting a specific use case, but rather trying to fit every use case. And then developers will always go for solutions that are meant for their specific use cases. And I think this is especially true in ZK, when there are lots of different problem spaces to explore and lots of proof systems just coming out all the time. I think it's super early. You know, for example, like Google built their own, I believe, proving system or something, because just the use cases, they needed something else, right? So if we were to standardize Graph16, for example, then we wouldn't have these other use cases. It would be hard to use with like legacy signature systems like RSA. Yeah, I could say more, but I'll keep it short.
Yingtong, do you want to respond to that or how you look at things?
Yeah, there's definitely a tension between having your standard be too specific, like Longfellow works for just them, versus making it too generic and then no one uses it anyway. So I certainly think we're super early in terms of ZK snarks to ossify anything, and any early attempts at standards should be as modular as possible. Yeah, that would be my answer. But I would just say the motivation to standardize is certainly coming from governments, regulators who are very used to working with sort of battle-hardened and standardized and already productionized primitives.
Yeah, I think like what Yingtong is very true. The way that I see it is that the thing that we should standardize are the abstractions. As in, like, what is a root of trust? Like, what sort of is the trust that is, like, how do you associate trust with a given credential? Like, what is an attestation? Like, these sort of, like, general, like, purpose, like, building blocks. I feel like at least, like, the definitions of them are useful to at least, like, discuss about. And then everything else is gonna just be an instantiation of these abstractions in, like, concrete proving systems or whatever. I think, like, for that, standardization is way too early. But I feel like at least having a shared common mental model for how like digital identity systems operate, as in like what sort of trust assumptions you have, what sort of like building blocks. So how do you, for example, how different use cases are expressed in a sort of construction of these different building blocks. So that is something that I think is going to be useful. I'm going to be talking about this in like a talk after this at 1 p.m. So yeah, I'll leave it for then.
Yeah, I think shared mental model, I think, makes a lot of sense, but I do also agree with the others that it's way too early to standardize. And especially if we have to think about competing against the likes of Google and Apple. You know, I think if we work on standardizing now, I think they're just going to crush us. I think the thing that we should be solely focused on right now is adoption and just growing the number of users who are actually onboarded into these systems so that we can bootstrap network effects and we can actually help defend against, you know, those bigger companies and potentially the governments that want to compete as well. And if you think about it, right, if you think about the history of a lot of different identifiers that people use today, a lot of them came from bootstrapping those network effects and not from standardization, right? So if you think about, I don't know, the social security number, the fact that it's used so widely in the US, even though it was designed as not something that you're supposed to use with banks, but purely as a number that you could receive that you could use to claim your social security benefits, is just a perfect example of how once you have a lot of adoption of a particular ID, people start, network effects grow and people start piling on and using that. So I think right now we should just focus entirely on growing adoption. That's my take.
Yeah, still at the Fox standards point, but I will say, especially in identity, I want to see for a long time, ideally forever, a very pluralistic view of these identities. And I think standards mean different things to different people. Obviously, I think it's nice if root of trust, for example, things get standardized or talked about, or at least that the UN knows that we want to use these root of trusts the way we want to use them, so they can facilitate that. But I don't want standardization as in your government issued ID is the only thing that represents your identity and gates everything in your life.
Yeah, I think there's a tension between the fact, as Marek was saying, that standards happen once you get adoption, and also the people who get adoption are often not incentivized to be very like open and pluralistic. So I think they're interesting cases, like maybe OAuth is an example of where that did somehow work, where you had these centralized players getting adoption, and then OAuth standard came and kind of made it more pluralistic. So there's probably something interesting to study from that.
Yeah, we should just avoid regulatory capture, like essentially. It's like if the government forced you to use like Anthropic or just Claude because they're like better solutions have gotten more adoption. So yeah, the pluralistic approach is good.
And also the idea, and this is something that PSE has done a ton of memeing about, which is very useful. The cryptography is supposed to help you go from data anywhere that has some kind of context associated with it and transform the data however you want, and not lose maybe that context. It's what we do with zero-knowledge proofs of passports, right? So ideally, I don't want to standardize how these proofs actually get issued or what these proofs actually say.
Okay, thank you. So we're almost at the end. I want to give you all, like, go through everyone, maybe take a minute and just sort of, if we meet again here in 2026, what changes would you most like to see when it comes to how institutions deploy or regulate secret-based identity? And yeah, what do you think is a realistic state will be in a year from now? A minute each, starting with Marek.
I mean, yeah, my biggest hope is that we get more biometric IDs issued by more governments. I think if we want to leverage a lot of the systems that are represented here on stage, without compromising privacy, we need, you know, more people to have these biometric IDs, right? I think as soon as you do the centralized approach, which I think is a very logical approach if you want to get global coverage, it does ultimately impact privacy, and that's a shame. And so more biometric IDs by more governments.
Yeah, I would echo that same point. And for us, like in the ZK space, we should like just integrate every single permutation of like hash function signature scheme for all these roots of trust, so we can make attestations about them. It's like,
Yeah, I think really the ZK part is a very, very specific layer of the digital identity stack. And I think to get true adoption, we need to make the interfaces of our systems more usable. So for example, KYC AML is not like a homogeneous and fixed set of requirements. It changes constantly according to use case, according to jurisdiction, and verifiers need to be able to express these requirements and update them as they change. And I would like to see more work done in other parts of the digital identity infrastructure, so namely revocation and also registries. So how do we make privacy preserving revocation systems? And also where should we host our registries of issuers, verifiers, and other public data?
It was like what I wish next year.
Yeah, what do you think is realistic, and what
Yeah.
you would like?
I think like
Happen.
we have to be still hyper focused on the challenges we experience from a technical limitations perspective, because it affects a lot. I mean, before we get into standards and stuff, we need to understand that sometimes we are sacrificing the core principles because of the technical limitations that exists in the way we build, how things could work. And there's a lot, like on a core infrastructure level to user experience, and we like flexing and trying to find this kind of best way to deliver the product and put it in the hands of the people. But at the end of the day, I do believe that we share this principle. So I wish that everything that needs to be solved technically, we're able to deliver. So then we reunite and make sure the foundation principles work and scale with it. So that's what my hyper focus for the year would be.
I think my wish list is just if not a passed piece of legislation, at least a tabled piece of legislation to reform the BSA, the Bank Secrecy Act, because I think that is by far the most, or would be the most impactful thing for private identity primitives and also just the financial sector as a whole. So yeah, that's my one wish.
I agree with all of the points so far, and something a bit different I would really like, which I think would enable all this, and is maybe slightly strange, is for ZK to enter the memetic space a bit more, right? Because like people don't know what ZK is, and governments are not going to buy into ZK, customers are not going to buy into ZK unless they actually know what it is, right? Because we're just like some weird people saying that there's like this fancy math that you can't understand that will protect like and do all these like magical things. Governments don't really understand it, neither do people. So, you know, I think it takes stuff like the way that crypto has entered the public awareness for ZK and other PETs to enter that public awareness for these things to actually happen.
Cool, right, thank you. So I think during this panel, we barely scratched the surface. We talked about different approaches to identity. We talked about sort of regulation and the difference between, I guess, going to market and winning sort of the market share. We talked about the technical limitations. We talked about standards and if we should pursue that or not, and the pros and cons and so on. Each of these topics we go much deeper into, and I would recommend everyone to seek out these panelists after this if you want to talk further. I want to get each of you to just take maybe 10, 20 seconds, any final words, announcements of talks you're doing this week or anything like this before you finish up for lunch.
so I'm talking about client-side proving out world and the future of digital identity, which is sort of an article I wrote and published last week. So yeah, 1:05 is when the talk starts, and you can also find the link on my pinned Twitter post or X post at DC Builder.
We have quite a lot of team, all technical team, or most technical team at our booth downstairs in the privacy corner. So come chat to us if you're interested in zero knowledge or cryptography in general. You'll have a good time. And come to our booth. It's right next to the Aztec booth. There might be a bridge going between them. We are recruiting people who might help us build a bridge between our two booths. Yeah.
Wait, is that a standard that you guys are building?
No, it's all going to be hodgepodge. There might be multiple bridges actually. No standards here.
I love it. While we're talking about booths, definitely come check out the South booth. We're in the L2 area, right next to World. And then I'm also giving a talk about self at Wallacon on Thursday, so definitely come check that out if you're interested.
Come talk to us. We have a booth as well. Like unforgettable product with demoing, and this is actually very interesting technology of fuzzy extractors we bring into biometrics and kind of cutting out the zero knowledge from the proof and overall the biometry. And it's a quite interesting experiment. I think it's a very interesting field to as well get familiar with.
Come talk to me if you want to work on standards.
And with those final words, I want to thank all the panelists and audience, and now we break for lunch.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.